Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for joining me this evening. I'm actually in the store once again. I'm in the office, but this time I'm going to be on camera a little bit, so you'll get to see the horrible, disorganized mess that my office has become. I'm joined tonight by Jennifer Richard Jacobson. Jennifer Richard Jacobson is the award-winning author of many books for children and young adults, including the Andy Shane Early Reader Series and The Dollar Kids. Twig and Turtle is her first series with Pixel Plus Ink. A graduate of the Harvard Graduate School of Education, when not writing, Jennifer provides training and writers' workshops for teachers. Jennifer lives in Maine with her husband and dog. You can learn more about Jennifer and her books at jenniferjacobson.com. So Jennifer, first and foremost, I really just want to thank you for being here with me tonight.
Oh, thank you, Drew. I am so happy to be at Town Book Center. This is exciting.
Awesome. We tend to feel the same way, but, we live here, so we're a little bit biased. So tonight, as I understand it, is not just me asking questions and us talking about books, but we actually get to sit and listen to a little bit of reading also.
Sure. So the newest book, the first book is here, Twig and Turtle, Big Move to a Tiny House.
Okay. But
my newest book that I'm going to read from tonight is Twig and Turtle, Make New Friends but Keep the Old. And normally I would start from the beginning to read, but because I know that I'm speaking to an audience that loves books already, I'm going to skip to a part that I think that you'll like a lot. Just to give you a little setup, you can see perhaps from the cover that there's a little friendship triangle going on. And if I open it up, the other thing that's happening in this book is that Twig and Turtle's parents are going away for a little mini vacation, and Grandma is coming to stay at the tiny house. And Grandma is not used to living in a tiny house. And so if you look, have I got it positioned correctly, Drew, there?
You are perfect.
Great. So if you can see, Grandma's stuff is all over this tiny house, and it's a little disconcerting at first, but other problems arise. Issues around Grandma's visit and issues around living in a tiny space. So I will begin with Grandma talking about the evening routine. She's just learned that the kids don't have homework.
Okay.
Wahoo, says Grandma. It's my lucky month. So let's get those dishes started. Then you can get your jammies on and we'll read. We'll start with the Prancing Dancing Ponies. That was Grandma's favorite when she was a little girl. Turtle gives me a shrug. We don't have that book, Grandma, she says. Yes, you do, cutie, Grandma says to Turtle as she fills the sink with lots of soapy water. That was the very first book I gave to Twig. I gave it to her before you were even born. Turtle looks at me as if to say, your turn. I take a deep breath. We got rid of our books before we moved into the tiny house, I tell her. You just discarded them? Grandma asks. You tossed them out? Oh no, I say. We gave them to the shelter for homeless families. She stops scrubbing the batter bowl. Your parents made the decision to have a house without books? Not without books, Turtle says. Just not the same books all the time. We get books from the library, I say, or from school, Turtle adds. And then we return them and get different ones, I tell Grandma. So we each only have one stack at a time. Because we don't have enough space, says Turtle. Here's how you can tell you haven't convinced someone. Their eyelids droop a little, making their eyes harder to read. They pull their mouth over to one side. Their face turns slowly red. It's Grandma's turn to take a deep breath. So this means no Prancing Ponies, no Madeline, no Olivia. What about a chair for my mother? I borrowed a picture book about what they do with the poo at the zoo, I say. And I have a story about monster trucks, Turtle offers. Grandma laughs and then becomes serious again. It still doesn't seem right that you don't have your own collection. Whenever I feel the tiniest bit lonesome, I pick up a favorite picture book. I have to admit, I do miss having Madeline around all the time. Hey, I say, getting an idea? You can tell us the story about the prancing ponies. That would make us happy. Ma sighs. I suppose I can, she says. I practically know it by heart. Get your jams on. I have a moment of missing Mom and Dad when I'm brushing my teeth. If they were here, they would have been the ones to tell Grandma that we gave away all the books she bought us. At least Grandma gets to tell her favorite story. And I'll keep my feelings about prancing ponies to myself. Because even though it was the first book Grandma ever gave me, and I love Grandma to the moon and back, I never did like those mean ponies. But you know that I can't leave it here. So I'm going to show you what Grandma does. There's a studio next door at Sudsy's Laundromat where the parents work. Mm-hmm. And she gets permission to build the bookcase. And then they head to the independent bookstore where they buy a whole new collection. Here's Twig helping. Mm-hmm. Of old friends because they're so important. I thought you might appreciate.
I do. I absolutely do. I think first of all, that's a great message, and it's a great lesson as well. I like the two people having different opposite viewpoints. No one's really right, no one's really wrong. It's working together, and that's going to tie in really beautifully to some of the questions that I've got, because I love getting to talk to different authors of different styles and different genres, because you're all trying to do such different things. So, with that being said, are you ready for some questions? Are you prepared?
I am.
Okay.
Go ahead. Shoot them my way.
All right. So my first question is this. Let's talk a little bit about the ins and outs of Twig and Turtle. Where did the initial spark for this idea come from?
My own childhood, for sure. When I was Twig's age, my favorite place to play was next door, mm-hmm. because my next door neighbors had a VW camper.
Ooh, okay.
And there was nothing more fun than imagining it as a little tiny house. The little sink, the table that folded out, the pop-up bed. And I think that I have never stopped trying to imagine what it would be like. And you think about kids. We made blanket forts, and we crawled into small spaces like cupboards. And there's something magical. I think that's why the tiny house movement has gained such steam. There's something magical about, challenging yourself to live within a small diameter.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that one of the things that's been really rewarding to see is how many more people are just embracing their own particular brand of whatever strange or happy or quirky is theirs. I feel like in the past, a lot of people wanted to do certain things and just went, yeah, but, this is the world, and I can't do this, I can't do that. Yeah. And now, so many more people are just like, yeah, but this is what I would like to do, and I can, so I'm going to do that. And it to me seems like a way to be a lot happier. So I
agree with you. And Twig and Turtle's parents choose to live in a tiny house for that reason. Dad's a comic book artist, Mom's a photographer, and they know that they can spend a whole lot more time doing what they love if they no longer have that big house that they moved from. Mm-hmm. So it's very much a series about the very thing that you're talking about.
Absolutely. And that sort of leads in really well to my next question, which is sort of like this. As booksellers, our job is to go out there and try and help people find the right books for them. One of the ways we do that is what I like to jokingly call the elevator pitch. 10 seconds or less, like someone goes, what is this book about? And I can explain to them. What would your elevator pitch be for Twig and Turtle?
So, two girls and their family move to Happy Trails, Colorado, where they live in a tiny house and face unique challenges in a very loving and supportive community.
I think it's
a very diverse community as well. That's one of the things that I love about Happy Trails. It's a very diverse community. There are differing opinions. In book 2, the girls and the toy store owner actually don't see eye to eye. But nevertheless, there's a lot of problem solving in the series.
problem solving is great. And again, like I sort of said earlier, it really shouldn't be about trying to make, one side is wrong. It's really a collaborative sort of effort. So, for my next question, why did you choose to write an early reader chapter book series? That's part one of it. Why an early chapter reader book series?
I have a couple of reasons. The very first thing that I ever published, well, it's not quite true. I had a couple picture books, but the first, what I consider novels, were very similar to Twig and Turtle. They were the Winnie series. Mm-hmm. And I loved writing a series for so many reasons. One being that, in the same way that readers love to go into a world and get to know the characters and not have to leave them, but to keep returning to that place and to returning to those friends that they've made. The same is true for a writer. It's just a really wonderful thing to be able to sink into a world that you know well and imagine the types of challenges that could happen for the characters in that world. But there's another reason that I want to share with you. And when my daughter, who is now an adult, was of chapter book age, her very first book was this one, Best Enemies. And I think that we underestimate the power of chapter books. We recognize, as I just read, my point of view about picture books. I think picture books are essential. And we recognize the value of picture books, and we know that novels are going to offer a lot of growth and emotional support and engagement for a reader. But I think sometimes we underestimate chapter books in that way. And my daughter, as I said, her favorite was Best Enemies, but she never left it behind. Like all through middle school and high school, when she was down and she needed cheering up, she reached for Best Enemies. Mm-hmm. Like, she made a very strong emotional attachment to those. She had a very strong emotional attachment to those books. And I think we don't realize that kids, say 6 to 9, are needing the same kind of companionship from books.
Absolutely. Look, I'm 31, and I can still tell you every major character in the Hank the Cowdog book series.
I love it.
I haven't read those books in probably 20 years, maybe more. But I, to this day, and it does happen, if I cannot get to sleep, I have my old clock radio that has the cassette tape player built in, and I have my collection of Hank the Cowdog cassette tapes, and I will play them, and they will put me to sleep. It's built into my brain at this point. So I think you're right. I think as kids, we absolutely bond things.
Yes.
So my next question then, what are some of the key things to remember when you're writing for this group? Or is it not? Is it the same as writing for any other group?
Both. So, we tend to remember that chapter books are for kids who are making that transition from beginning readers to middle grade novels, young middle grade novels. And so I'm just looking for the right kind of page. If I go back to this one, so there's spot art, and there's a lot of white space, and the sentences tend to be simpler. They say complex things, but they're not complex sentences. And we know that chapter books meet the needs of those kids. But what we sometimes forget is that there are early readers, say 6, 7, 8-year-olds, who began to read very early. And yet the problems and the issues that you often find in novels, and I know because I write some novels with some pretty deep issues, homelessness, and I have one middle grade novel that actually is about mental illness, so they can get pretty heavy at times. And there's this group that are they've taken off with their reading, but they're not yet ready for issues to be presented in that maybe deeper, more complex way. And yet, in a way, Drew, you also said, or are they like any other book? And I think that's also true, because 6 to 9-year-olds have a very complex emotional life of their own, and they do they wonder about their place in the world, and they wonder how to say things to their grandmother that won't hurt her feelings, and they wonder how to deal with friendship triangles, and they wonder, what do you say to the toy store owner when she's insisting that the packages be divided in blue and pink? It's so they're, in many ways, it's the same. I like thinking about the emotional needs of a 6 to 9 year old.
I think that's spectacular. And I'm going to... So, Marielle is our children's buyer and our event coordinator. She's the person you've been emailing with. She is delightful. And she has, as we all do, one of her has a soapbox. And this particular soapbox is on the importance of kids' books and how they're not just books for kids, and they shouldn't just all be about, fluffy adventures, that you can really tackle topics. You can help people engage and learn how to deal with some very mature, serious sorts of things. So since she's not here tonight, I'm going to borrow her soapbox. I'll step on it myself, and we'll talk about that for a second, because I think that's probably been, for me, coming into the book world, one of my favorite things I've gotten to learn about and understand and realize I've sort of always believed, just didn't have the words for. So, in that big jumble of a diatribe, here is my question. You sort of touched on the idea of helping, kids figure out how to navigate the world. The first part of it is, how much does that influence your story? Do you go in there saying, what I want to focus on is how to talk to adults when they disappoint you? What I want to focus on is how to navigate a triangle friendship. Or do you write a story and then go, oh, this is a great way to explore this?
Of course, because it's a series, and you tend to write the books a little faster. Mm-hmm. I do need to know a little more about what each book is going to be about. But I'm always surprised, Twig and I have a lot in common. And so once I've begun the story, I'm in Twig's body, and I'm back as an 8-year-old in a 3rd grade class. And I'm coming up against issues at the same time that she is, and puzzling them out as I'm writing. We'd like to think that we grow so far away from our 8-year-old selves, but it's just isn't really the case. The latest book, which is, I've already completed book 6, even though this is book 4.
Oh, wow.
And book 6 is all about rejection and how we deal with rejection. And so 8-year-old Twig is dealing with rejection, but so is this writer all the time. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of overlap between what I'm thinking about and what Twig's thinking about. I just present it from an 8-year-old's perspective.
Sure, absolutely. And I think that you touched on something that's really important, that kids are a lot more, advanced than we give them credit for. They have very intricate lives. I mean, I remember being a kid and dealing with feeling like, people don't like the things I like, and I'm weird, and I'm a dork, and, dealing with that rejection and finally coming to a place where you're like, well, I guess that's okay. I just like the things I like. And I should know, because I recently did that like a whole month ago. So if you're not there yet, anyone who's listening, don't worry. It only took me 30 years. You'll probably do it quicker than I did. But I think that's a wonderful thing to be able to do. And you also sort of teed me up really well for my next question. You mentioned that you sort of, when you're writing this, you go back and you are Twig, and you're writing this, in your 8-year-old self. Does any part of the Twig and Turtle books come from your own experiences growing up?
Yes, the Twig and Turtle books are filled with imaginative play. Mm-hmm. And I was a kid, I think that's why I'm a writer. I was a kid who hung on to imaginative play long after, I think, or at least I believed, other kids gave it up. And when I'm asked, why did you become a writer? I was a reader, but really, if you think about imaginative play, what are you doing? You're creating characters, and when those characters talk to one another, that's dialogue. And you set up problems for these characters, and then you set up solutions. And I would create these worlds, and I would go into these worlds, and I would spend hours and hours there, whether I was playing with a dollhouse or I was outside, just imagining the characters in our backwoods. And Twig and Turtle do the same. They play in book 2. They play an invented game called Magic Woods, and Twig even gives directions for how you too can play Magic Woods. You simply take the cushions off your couch and you set up a little boundary, and then you empty the dirty clothes hamper into the middle, and you create hills and valleys out of the dirty clothes, and then you go and you get whatever objects, like a spoon can be a queen, and those are your characters, and all of that comes from my childhood. That's how I spent many hours.
Awesome. Yeah, I was always fond of pillow forts. That was something I thought I was pretty good at.
Yes.
So, what role? And you sort of answered this as well a little bit earlier. You're ahead of me on this one. What role do you think chapter books aimed at 6 to 8 year olds play in getting them to read beyond the level reader stage?
I think they give them confidence. When you're that age and you look at a middle grade novel and there's all those words on a page, chapter after chapter of words, that feels so daunting. But chapter books or traditional novels are set up to help kids make that transition. And it's so much fun to see their confidence grow when they realize, I can do this. I'm reading this story and I'm reading it on my own. I also think that they're wonderful read-alouds for, say, the 5 or 6 year old. Sometimes the family wants a longer story than a picture book or wants to stay in a series for a while.
Yeah.
And you can read these aloud because you know that the issues are not going to be too complex for your 5 and 6 year old.
Absolutely. I cannot tell you the number of parents who come in and they're looking for the next book in the series they are reading with their kids, because there's something comforting in knowing, nope, my kids love Turtle and Twig, or Twig and Turtle, that's what I have to get them. I don't have to worry about it. We don't have to experiment. We know this is a good place for us to be.
Yes.
So I guess my next question then is sort of a follow-up. What do you think makes Twig and Turtle stand out to readers?
I think that it's realistic, and yet there's many adventures. Twig and Turtle have to venture beyond their comfort zone over and over. And I hope that I build tension and excitement around those adventures that they take, around those risks that they take, that of course are within the means of their very, again, supportive community. But they are adventurous, I do hope.
Yeah. I think that's also quintessentially part of being a kid, terrifying your parents to a certain extent. And doing something a little wild. I remember there was a retaining wall in the house I grew up at, and it was perfectly, as far as I was concerned, size. You could, had handholds and footholds, and you'd climb a 15-foot tall wall, and it was perfectly safe. And I couldn't understand why my parents were so concerned. I was like, I'm fine. I'll never fall. Now as an adult, I'm like, oh my God, I was climbing a wall freestyle. That was such a bad idea.
Yes.
But I think it's part of being a kid, so I think you're right. That absolutely is something that's going to stand out. In your opinion, is it more important for chapter books like Twig and Turtle to be educational or fun? And obviously, it's a hard question to answer, so maybe the better question is, what's the percentage breakdown, you think?
For me, I want reading to be the most enjoyable experience. I want kids to fall in love with books and feel as if they've found companionship, and they don't put them down. They keep turning the pages. They can't wait for the next one. So I would say engaging and fun is definitely at the top of my list. However, as I mentioned already, I do think too that when you're reading a really good book, you often see yourself. You see a character who's going through what you're going through, has the same questions you have, and this bond forms, and that's, I think, probably the top priority for me is that I want Twig and Turtle to be relatable kids that express the fears of kids, that express the difficulties that kids have at times, so that readers feel that kinship. Having said all of that, I'm a former teacher, and I'm a former first, second, and third grade teacher. So do little educational things slip into these books? Well, yeah, I can't resist. So like in the very first book, when Twig's family moves to the tiny house, they can't bring Bo, the Great Dane dog the Great Dane that Twig has fallen in love with, and she needs to come up with a solution for Bo, and she and friends end up writing an information piece, a persuasive piece in school during writer's workshop. So I just happen to know that book from a teacher's point of view is a great mentor text for persuasive writing and for the effect persuasive writing can have, but that is secondary to the fun and engagement.
That's a great answer. By the way, now you've got me emotionally invested in a dog that I know nothing about, and I hope that everything worked out well for Bo, because that makes me so sad. So we get a lot of parents who are looking for recommendations for young readers, especially when a series runs out, when they're like, we have read all the Bad Guy books, we have read all of the Magic Treehouse books, we can't wait for the next one, we need something now. What would be something that you would recommend for a voracious reader if they have read all the Twig and Turtle books, they've blown through them, and I got a parent who's like, I need something, we're going to the beach this weekend? What's a good suggestion?
Renee Watson has a chapter book series, and I believe it's like Ways to Make Sunshine, and that would be a book in a similar vein to Twig and Turtle. Another series is Jasmine Taguchi, Mochi Queen, by Debbie Machiko Florence, and the Twig and Turtle is about siblings. And so are these other books also are sibling relationships. Jasmine Taguchi has an older sister. And so I think that readers who love the world of Happy Trails in the Twig and Turtle books would find these books very satisfying as well.
Awesome. Okay. So this next question is a little more about you. I alluded to, for me, Hank the Cowdog, that was my early chapter book that just sort of caught my attention. What was something that you read early on that really kind of imprinted on you?
This will not surprise you in the least. The Boxcar Children.
Oh, it's a great, okay.
Isn't it? Like,
yeah.
Can you see the influences? I loved being in that train car with those kids, setting it up as a little home. I haven't gone far from my favorite series.
You know what? I think if we're lucky, we tend not to. Then, as a follow-up sort of question to that, when was the moment where you sort of went, I want to write. That's what I want to do. I want to be a writer.
I was in college, and I was training to be a teacher. And one of the requirements for education is a children's literature course. And I had to read, I had to read probably 100 children's books during that course. And I fell back in love with them and knew then that I wanted to write them.
Yeah. It's great that you found it. I'm glad you did too, because now we have more awesome books that we get to experience and engage with.
Yeah, and a little connection here. So, Writer's Workshop is a model of teaching writing in the classroom that I used when I was a teacher. And when I was teaching first grade, I said to my kids, we're going to write together all year, and I'm going to teach you everything that I know about writing, and you're going to teach me everything you know about what makes a good story. And we wrote together that entire year. And I'm a very young author at this time. And those kids, it took me many years to publish my first book. And those kids, when I did finally publish and had my first book signing, some of them came to that book signing. Yeah, but get this true, they were seniors in high school. It took that long.
Well,
But
you got it.
I
That's
got
what
there.
matters. Yeah. That's incredible. That's wonderful. So I guess my follow-up question to that, and I've only got a few more. I don't want to take up too much of your time this lovely evening. Any advice that you could give to young people or to older people who want to write, who want to become authors? What's if you could break it down into one sentence, what would it be?
Read. I'm going to tell one little more anecdote. The way that I finally did break into publishing, we had suddenly moved. We were transferred to Massachusetts. I live in Maine. We were transferred to Massachusetts, and I got a job there with a educational publishing company, and they were putting together a first grade reading anthology, and they knew that I was a writer and that I'd worked as a children's librarian and that I had taught first grade. And so my job was to read 500 picture books and then report to them on which ones I thought should be included in the anthology. And what it really did for me was reading 500 picture books back to back. I got the rhythm, I got the structure, I got I discovered my own narrative voice. And then the next book that I wrote was actually the one that was accepted. And so I'd say read widely in the genre that you want to write. It's the very best way.
So it's funny, before the show, we were talking a little bit, and as often happens, I end up asking a couple questions, because, we have half an hour to kill, because the tech run tends to be pretty quick. And you asked me a question, which was, is there anything that anyone gives the same answer on? Are they all different? And I said, no, everyone answers very differently, except for that question. That is the one universal question that everyone answers the same. Doesn't matter. I've talked to horror authors. I have talked to romance, fiction, nonfiction, poetry. They all say, read. Just read. So if you are listening and you are not sure and you're like, well, I don't know, but I want to write fantasy or I want to write the great Western, read. The correct answer is read. Just read. So this next question is one that once came from someone who was at one of our live events, and it's become sort of a favorite here. Who is your authorial doppelganger? And what I mean by that is the person who you feel your style and their style are very comparable. It can be anyone, but who do you think that would be for you? Well,
that's a hard question to answer, because the person that I'm thinking of is a genius. So I'm not saying, in answering this question this way, I'm not saying that I have her genius, but we're often compared, and I think it's because she wrote and I write realistic fiction that sort of from the heart of that 8-year-old, and that would be Beverly Cleary. My books are sometimes, when reviewed, put in the same category as Ramona books. And again, it's not, I'll never be Beverly Cleary. I mean, she just had a particular kind of genius. But I think that that's the vein that I write in.
That is a great answer. And again, most of the time when I ask that, people are like, well, I don't want to compare myself to this person. And it's like, compare yourself. Go for it. Be your own promotional person. So my last question for you this evening is there anything that you're working on right now that you're excited that you can that you want to share with us this evening?
Well, I can tell you what my next book out is.
Ooh, yes.
And that it's a middle grade novel. It's a middle grade romance. It's the first middle grade romance I've ever written, and it's called Crashing in Love. And it's about a girl who hops on her bike and is racing down the road, a main road, early in the morning to say goodbye to her friend who's leaving for the summer, and she nearly collides with a pile of clothes in the middle of the road, and she's curious. Even though she's late, she turns back and she looks at that pile, and it turns out that it's not a pile of clothes, it's a boy, and he's unconscious in the middle of the road. And that one is Crashing in Love.
Yeah. That sounds really, really interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing it.
Thank you.
This is the part of the show where I have to be shameless and plug my store. if this all sounded like fun to you, and you go, I want to read that book, or I want to read that book with my kids, or some kids in my life, or teachers or parents, whomever, you can get the book. You can get it at Town Book Center. We're located in Collegeville, Pennsylvania. We are right across from the largest Wegmans in the country. Like, if you see it, you see us. And we're happy to help you out. If you are not in Pennsylvania and you still want to support a local bookstore, and you want to support this local bookstore, you can do that online at townbc.com. That's TOW, N as in Nike, E as in Echo, B as in Bravo, C as in Charlie.com. And you can go online, you can order the book from us there. We will ship it to you. If you don't feel comfortable leaving your house, we can do that for you here in Pennsylvania too. That's really it. I just wanted to thank you so much for being on here with me tonight. This was a lot of fun for me. I really do enjoy getting to do these.
Oh, thank you, Joe. I had a ball, and I just thought these questions were terrific. It was so much fun to talk books tonight, and thank you for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
Oh my gosh, no, thank you. It's the pleasure's all mine. For everyone else at home, thank you so much, and keep on watching. We do these for you. Have a great rest of your night, everybody.